Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the privilege of having the light that you have shed upon your last days people regarding the importance of this task you've set before us of training the last generation, the remnant, raising these children to be the final workers and the final possessors of the message of truth. As we look at this next session on balanced parenting, we pray that you would give us the right perspective, that we would have the correct balance regarding all of the difficult challenges we face as parents. In Jesus' name, amen. In the last session, we talked about discipling our children. And I left one thing out, one very important thing out. We looked at family worship, teaching them the Bible, praying together continually. We looked at character development, all the different character traits. We looked at guarding their hearts from worldly influences in media and peers and so on. One thing we didn't talk about is the Sabbath. Keeping the Sabbath together as a family. And I omitted that from the previous session intentionally because the chapter in Child Guidance, chapter 79, there is an entire chapter on this, every word of which is so good and so true and says it so well that I couldn't bring myself to select quotes out of it to sum up the key main ideas because the whole chapter is just that good. So just read it. In order to get the full Raising the Remnant seminar, your homework, parents, is to read chapter 79 of the book Child Guidance by Ellen G. White. What a wonderful chapter on how to enjoy and keep holy the Sabbath. Because if our children develop a love for the Sabbath, if they understand the holiness of the day and the joy and delight of the day, and not doing their own pleasure, but in bonding with their family, in going to church, in spending time in nature, that is one of the keystone, hallmark, capstone spiritual experiences that will disciple them unto Jesus. So I can't say it any better than the way that book says it. So I'm just going to leave that topic off for your personal study. But it is an addendum, an appendix, actually a core element to the Raising the Remnant seminar that I'm just leaving for your own personal experience. But I do want to say what we're doing in this session is meant to be sort of sandwiched between what we did at the end of session 2 and what we're going to do in session 4. In session 4, we're looking at discipline, training our children's behavior, punishments, all of that kind of, my child is misbehaving, how do I manage their behavior stuff that parents are asking about. And at the end of session 2, we looked at guarding their hearts, keeping them away from media and so on. And these two things, sometimes if we push them and talk only about them, we can develop an imbalance in our parenting. And so this session is called Weighed in the Balance, because we are in the time of the judgment. And we must have that intensity of insisting on prompt and perfect obedience that we will talk about in session 4. And we must be intense about sheltering our children from that worldly influence. But we don't want to be such intense people that we don't have balance in our lives and joy. And like this one, Barna found that successful parents are good listeners. Good listeners. So we're not only just instructing the Bible by teaching and speaking a lot and lecturing about behavior and this kind of thing. We also have the balance of listening. Parents should encourage their children to confide in them and unburden to them their heart griefs, their little daily annoyances and trials. Kindly instruct them and bind them to your hearts. Oh, that's so important. Teach them to make you their confidant. Let them whisper in your ear their trials and joys. Children would be saved from many evils if they would be more familiar with their parents, be friends with their parents. Parents should encourage in their children a disposition to be open and frank with them, to come to them with their difficulties, and when they are perplexed as to what course is right, to lay the matter just as they view it before their parents and ask their advice. This is just like our relationship with God, right? We have perfect openness with Him. Yes, He is our authority. We respect, we reverence God, and our children have that respect and obedience of their parents as well. But also there's that openness and that closeness and that tenderness and that friendship. We have to have that with our children. If we're good listeners, that'll help to foster that. If they come to us and they confess that they've done something wrong, This is not the time to unleash upon them the lecture of you shouldn't have done this and you're going to pay for this. And no. They've already come and confessed, right? So they are repentant in the fact that they, when we confess our sins to God, He is faithful and just to forgive. And that's what we do at that moment. We have forgiveness and so much appreciation that they would actually come and share these things that are on their conscience and on their heart. And when we're so busy and we don't hear their hearts, we don't listen, and we're not in tune with their emotions, with their spirit, we miss opportunities for literally life-changing moments to connect with our children in deep, deep ways. Which Barna found also that successful parents avoided being too soft, but also avoided being too intimidating. They found the balance. Not too soft and touchy-feely, but not too intense and in-your-face and intimidating. Here's some quotes on this. Uniform firmness and unimpassioned control are necessary to the discipline of every family. So unimpassioned, uniform firmness and unimpassioned control. Do you hear the balance there? How about this one? Let authority and affection be blended. Oh, that's beautiful. That's such a succinct statement. Authority and affection are blended. So it's not either or. It's not sometimes I'm nice and loving and sensitive and affectionate, and other times look out because I'm, it's authority, the good element of being an authority, and the good elements of affection blended together. Not either or, not sometimes this, sometimes that. I'm always authoritative, and I'm always loving you. Isn't that awesome? Fathers, combine affection with authority, kindness and sympathy with firm restraint. Uniform firmness and unimpassioned control are necessary to the discipline of every family. Say what you mean calmly, move with consideration, and carry out what you say without deviation. You hear calmly, but you're firm, so the authority and the affection are blended. If you think about this, our children are going to get their picture of God from looking at us, right? And what kind of God is He? Our God is a God of love. God is love, is the very definition of His character. But when I say those words to our culture, you know what our culture hears? That God is just the sensitive, affectionate, more sentimental type of, that's what we use the word love. We don't think of the last session that we're going to do, those whom I love, I rebuke and chasten. We don't think of that, but that's part of God's love as well. God is the perfect combination of both. And I know that there's like theological schools of thought that separate over this. And one side says, we promote and champion the character of God, because He is a God of love, and they talk about His mercy and His grace and forgiveness and the righteousness that He gives us free of cost, and all those things are true. But you know what this side will sometimes fail to do? Is to talk about the firm rebuke, the straight testimony, which is given in love. Those whom I rebuke, those whom I love, I rebuke and chasten. So if you only have a one-sided picture of God's love, then you are missing what it means to say that God is love. But then this side over here, we'll hear these guys saying, God is love, God is love, God is love. And these guys sometimes feel like they are sort of degrading what God's love means, and it's being weakened into a mere sentimentalism. And so what they will do is sometimes avoid the love language. And they will stop emphasizing the forgiveness and mercy and grace, which is so central to the character of God. What a horrible pit to fall in on this side. So what we want to do is we want to bring the rebuke and chasten, and we want to bring the affection, mercy, and forgiveness, and understand true biblical agape love that God is. And we want to reflect that to our children. Firmness and authority blended. Forgiveness and rebuke and discipline blended in one person. And both parents. It sometimes happens that of the mother and the father, one is too indulgent and the other too severe. That's not a good thing. Parents are to work together as a unit. There must be no division. But many parents work at cross purposes, and thus the children are spoiled by mismanagement. Which brings us to another Barna finding. Successful parents meet their children's emotional and physical needs. Now, I want to park here for a while because this one is hugely important. I'll tell you something. If our children's needs are met, we talked earlier about if they haven't eaten enough, or they haven't slept enough, or they've eaten too much, or irregular meals, sugar, all of this, that can have a big bearing upon their behavior. And when we talk in session 4 about children's behavior and discipline issues, if you don't get this part of this session first, then you're just beating your head against the wall over here. We've got to meet every physical and emotional need they have in order to set them up for the greatest chances of success in their character. So start with physical, okay? Physical needs, of course, regular and abundant sleep, exercise, being outdoors, meals, water. They can sometimes just be dehydrated, and that messes with your head. Regular and abundant. Abundant means plenty of it. Regular means it's consistent, according to a schedule. So the physical needs are being met. There's a bedtime. There's a meal time. And these times are fixed and firm. Let's read about this. Parents wonder that children are so much more difficult to control than they used to be, when in most cases, their own criminal mismanagement has made them so. The quality of food they bring upon their tables and encourage their children to eat is constantly exciting their animal passions and weakening the moral and intellectual faculties. The importance of regularity in the time for eating and sleeping should not be overlooked. Since the work of building up the body takes place during the hours of rest, it is essential, especially in youth, that sleep should be regular and abundant. If all would eat at regular periods, not tasting anything between meals, they would be ready for their meals and would find a pleasure in eating that would repay them for their effort. Don't eat at all, ever, between meals. After the regular meal is eaten, the stomach should be allowed to rest for 5 hours. Not a particle of food should be introduced into the stomach until the next meal. Parents, here's regular exercise. You can see what I'm getting at with the pictures. Inaction is the greatest curse that ever came upon youth. So if our kids are spending hours a day with screens and in desks and not having sufficient time outdoors and exercising the physical frame that God has given to them, it's the greatest curse that ever came upon youth. That's a strong statement. The health cannot be preserved unless some portion of each day is given to muscular exertion in the open air. I mentioned earlier that basically during the summer and fall and spring months, Levi and Silas pretty much live outside with their mom. And yes, there's housework to do inside too, but they get that stuff done really quick. Dad helps out sometimes with some of that, and they're outside with the maximum number of hours possible with the garden, and there's a million things you can do outside. And even during the winter, we try and do it as much as possible. We have our 4-year-old Levi he has personal time. We call it rest time. And he ceased napping, and so we included a part in his day where he has some time, just him and Jesus, just quiet time, rest time, and it's outside. And so he's just outside for 45 minutes, an hour, every afternoon, weather permitting. Just like it says here, small children should be left as free as lambs to run out of doors, to be free and happy, and should be allowed the most favorable opportunities to lay the foundation for sound constitutions. Of course, on their own, but with parents mostly. Equalize the taxation of the mental and physical powers. That means 50-50. That means this is mainly for older kids. For younger kids, the mental and physical powers, it's mostly all physical. But as they get older, you want to have it 50-50 for the youth. You don't want to be screens and desks for all the day. You want 50-50. I get into that in more detail in Undoctrinated, the seminar on true education. So let's get into now some emotional needs that children have. There's a number of emotional needs, and these are very important. The first one, probably the most important one, is your presence, your time. Time. Just being there for and with your children. The maximum amount of time you possibly can. We've talked about that already in session 1. Adversity is another emotional need. And we talked about this a little bit with perseverance, but adversity means that a child needs challenges and needs things to overcome, because that will develop a sense of self-reliance, fortitude, perseverance, etc. So you provide adversity in their life. Now you might say, oh, this sounds horrific. How could this sound like some sort of child abuse? Now there are forms of adversity that are way over the top, that are abuse. Some children go through horrific things. And that's not good adversity. They found in studies that going through those horrific things leads to more difficult abilities, not as good of abilities as an adult to handle life's challenges. But they also found in the same study that children who face no adversity have the same level of challenges as adults as people who face severe adversity, meaning abuse type of situations. So being totally spoiled and never having any challenges in life is just as bad for your development as facing really bad hardships in life. What brings about the best result of a well-adjusted, well-balanced adult is having moderate amounts of adversity. I'm paraphrasing and summing up a study that's much more thoroughly dealt with in the Classroom of the Remnant, but there you have it. So we want our kids to have adversity. Here's a quote about it. Let the child and the youth be taught that every mistake, every fault, every difficulty conquered becomes a stepping stone to better and higher things. It is through such experiences that all who have ever made life worth living have achieved success. Oh, I like that quote. It is obstacles that make men strong. It is not helps, but difficulties, conflicts, rebuffs that make men of moral sinew. Too much ease in avoiding responsibility have made weaklings and dwarfs of those who ought to be responsible men of moral power and strong spiritual muscle. Another related emotional need is not just adversity, but the independence that they develop from adversity also takes place when they have legitimate choices. I believe that choice is an actual emotional need. In order for our children to become thinkers, not mere reflectors of other men's thoughts, they're going to need to have opportunities to make choice. If everything is only dictated to them, and they never have to make choices or get to have choices in things that are legitimately something that you ought to be able to have some choice in the matter, then they will only learn to be automatons, right? Like Prussian schooling is trying to teach. And so I get into that, and of course the series called Schooled, but in Undoctrinated we see how we can become thinkers and critical thinkers. The Classroom of the Remnant gets into this as well. How to become thinkers, not mere reflectors of other men's thoughts, which leads to another Barna finding. Successful parents did not dictate to their children what they should think. They taught critical thinking based upon the Bible. So the children were taught to base their decisions, their beliefs, their worldview upon the Word of God and come to those thoughts and decisions for themselves. Now, if we don't allow decision making, this is the kind of home that you could run the risk of having. There are many families of children who appear to be well trained while under the training discipline. But when the system which has held them to set rules is broken up, this isn't to say we shouldn't have rules. We're going to get the balance here, but these children seem to be incapable of thinking, acting, or deciding for themselves. These children have been so long under what kind of rule? Iron rule. Not allowed to think and act for themselves in those things in which it was highly proper that they should. That they have now no confidence in themselves to move out upon their own judgment, having an opinion of their own. And when they go out from their parents to act for themselves, they are easily led by others' judgment in the wrong direction. There are many who believe without a reason on which to base their faith, without sufficient evidence as to the truth of the matter. If an idea is presented that harmonizes with their own preconceived notions, they are all ready to accept it. They do not reason from cause to effect. Their faith has no genuine foundation. And in the time of trial, they will find that they have built upon the sand. So we need to let them learn to draw lessons and discern truth for themselves. And that's what it means for them to have choice, to develop that critical thinking capacity. Another emotional need, though, would be structure. They need to have order and structure in their lives. It's not all free for all, choose whatever, do what thou wilt. No. There needs to be structure, there needs to be a routine, there needs to be order and a schedule. And that's how children feel safe, as we saw earlier, feel secure because they know what to expect. In fact, we learned this with our son Levi. He would get very anxious about certain things if he didn't know what was going to happen next. And we learned when he was 2, we would just explain to him, Levi, we're going to do this, then this, okay? And then we're going to go there, and this is what's going to happen. And as soon as he felt like there was some structure built into this and mom and dad are in control, he could relax, which is just a much better feeling. But if we're haphazard and we don't have schedules and routines and structure, haphazard work in the home will not pass the review in the judgment. And that's a serious thing. So how do we avoid haphazard parenting? One of the best and most important ways to do that is to start out by, as far as possible, it is well to consider what is to be accomplished through the day. And then make a memorandum of the different duties that await your attention and set apart a certain time for the doing of each duty. This is just common sense, right? Make a to-do list, have a schedule. I have found it tremendously helpful to have an outline for the day where you just kind of have a standard way that your day goes. and you have different slots there where you can get things done. And then you make your to-do list here, and you say, we're going to insert that here, and we're going to insert that here, and then that's about all we're going to get done, right? Because you have expectations. We have meal times here. We want to make sure to have worship prioritized here. And so here's what you can start your schedule with. In every family, there should be a fixed time for morning and evening worship, as I just mentioned. But when in the morning and evening? You're thinking through your outline. Okay, how is my daily routine going to go? Where should I put morning and evening worship? Morning, evening. What does that mean? At an early hour of the evening. Oh, that's helpful. When we can pray unhurriedly and understandingly. We should present our supplications and raise our voices in happy, grateful praise. So we're not tired. In the morning, the Christian's first thoughts should be upon God. So there's some helpful tips on how to do that. So build your morning routine. Ours is something like this. Our children wake up. First thing we want to do is get them hydrated because you've gone all night not drinking. So that's going to help. H2O, first thing in the morning. And having time with Jesus together there as a family. First thoughts upon God. That's where family worship is. While you drink, or right after you drink, and then breakfast right away. Because kids, they got to drink, they got to eat. This is important, or it starts to make their life more difficult. And so we have breakfast right after family worship. We clean up, and then they go to personal devotions. And then the morning starts. And the whole morning can be filled with any sorts of things here. And then make sure to be giving them proper hydration throughout the morning as well, which then precedes lunch. We always drink before we eat. So water and then lunch. I'm just kind of giving, this is not like from heaven, right? This is just what we've figured out. That's our morning routine. Our afternoon goes something like this. After lunch, Levi has his rest time. Silas has his nap. Levi's rest time is not as long as Silas's nap, but then there's some one-on-one time, Levi and Dad. Mom gets some things done then. And then there's also family time in the evening after getting some other things done where we want to make sure to have some sort of thing where we're doing together. Maybe it's work. So sometimes it's recreation. Sometimes go for a walk, go to the park, do something fun. Usually when we do some service-oriented thing, we'll put that in the morning. We'll make a whole day excursion out of it. But that pretty much fills the day. Then you're at my two boys eat a little bit for supper, light supper, and then that's followed by bath time, get ready for bed, evening worship, etc., and all of that, and then bed. So when you build your day and you have that routine and that intentionality, it just makes everybody relax a little bit. If you do it right, you don't want to be like so intense about like, hey, it's 2:21 and we're not supposed to be, you don't want to go over the top with that. But meal times, you do want to be pretty strict with the when you're eating and when you don't want that an hour here, an hour there. There's a statement I believe it's coming up. It's better to have the mealtime 5 minutes early than 5 minutes late. And so, there's some variation there, but we don't want that just sky's the limit. But in regards to the schedule, having a proper balanced perspective on it and having that routine is helpful because then the kids have structure and they know what to expect. But it's not so rigorous that it's like a straitjacket and they don't know how to live outside of it either. So we sometimes have days where we don't follow that because we're going somewhere and doing something different. But another emotional need is fun. Bring all the pleasure possible into your exercises as teacher and educator of your children. All the pleasure possible. Kids need fun. If parents would gather the children close to them and manifest an interest in all their efforts and even in their sports, their little games, sometimes even being a child among children, they would make the children very happy and would gain their love and win their confidence. And the children would sooner respect the love and authority of their parents and teachers. Your children love companionship. This is an emotional need of theirs as well, companionship. They can seldom enjoy themselves alone. They yearn for, here's some more emotional needs, sympathy and tenderness. That which they enjoy, they think will please mother also, and it is natural for them to go to her with their little joys and sorrows. The mother should not wound their sensitive hearts by treating with indifference matters that, though trifling to her, are of great importance to them. Her sympathy and approval are precious. Her approving glance, a word of encouragement or commendation will be like sunshine in their hearts, often making the whole day happy. I love that quotation. It can be like sunshine in their hearts. Their faces light up. That connection, what we just read, the companionship, the sympathy, the tenderness. These things you just pour into your children's hearts absolutely liberally and abundantly. And it will fill their emotional needs up. So we won't have to talk about as much of what we're going to talk about in session 4. Another emotional need, another emotional need is affirmation and commendation. To commend them, to affirm of them. God said to Jesus, his son, "You are my beloved son in whom I am well pleased." And we all need to hear that from our parents. And if you didn't hear that, by the way, enough as a kid, and you feel you were beaten down, and you have all these insecurities and low self-worth, which many of us do, and we may not even be aware of it, go to God and hear that from him so that he can pour into you his affirmation, and then you can pour it into your children. Listen to this. Children need appreciation, sympathy, and encouragement. But care should be taken not to foster in them a love of praise. Oh, that's important. Commend your children whenever you can. So, whenever you can, when there's something to commend, you're not just praising them. Make their lives as happy as possible. Remember that children need not only reproof and correction, but encouragement and commendation, the pleasant sunshine of kind words. So we're not putting the children on display as prodigies of wit and wisdom and repeating their sayings and exaggerations in their hearing. No, we can commend our children in good conscience by not giving them a love of praise when we commend them for things they've done well, when we thank them. Here's the quote: "Be kind and tender-hearted, showing Christian politeness, thanking and commending your children for the help they give you." One of the phrases I like to use with Levi is I like to say, "Levi, Jesus really helped you do such and such," or "You really had Jesus in your heart there, didn't you, when you made that choice?" And so you give the glory to God, and you can say, "Thank you, Levi," or "Thank you to your son or daughter for allowing the Lord to help you do that." And that way it doesn't become a prideful thing and a love of praise. Another emotional need is that they actually feel accomplishments, that they're not just being commended for things that we kind of make up. I mean, they know when they really haven't done much, and we're just kind of like, sometimes grandparents do this, or we as parents, we just praise our kids, and we just kind of lift them up, and really they haven't done much. But they'll get a sense that they've done something well when they've done something well. So we have our kids doing actual work, accomplishing real things. We talked about the family firm earlier. I have to throw in some of my photo album here. This is our 100-foot rows of beds that I mentioned earlier. Levi and Dad preparing the beds for planting in the spring. So he feels like he's accomplished something there when he sees the papers from Belt of Truth Ministries that he's shredding in the shredder there. You can see and hear it's very tactile, a sense of accomplishment. He helps stack the wood in the winter. He didn't stack that whole thing, of course, by himself, but he throws a couple of pieces on there and he can see what he's getting done. And so the sense of accomplishment. You feel like you've done something well, and that's an emotional need. Another emotional need that we sometimes neglect is physical touch. There's something physical that happens within our physiology when we hug, when we smile. When we do these things, wrestling on the floor and babies, skin to skin with their mother, these kinds of things actually release bonding hormones that are wonderful displays of affection and not just the physical touch, but just physical affection in general, playing together, all of the fun stuff that we can do, having ridiculous amounts of fun. and that really will help kids bond with their parents so that when we get to this other stuff, it'll be more meaningful. Now, I want to shift gears into another Barna finding on this because successful parents advance their children at a pace that's natural for the children. So we've met their emotional needs, but then we also are challenging them and growing them at a pace that's natural for each child and natural for children in general. And as I think about that, I think about my two, and I notice how different they are. I think every parent who has had two has noticed how different the two are. And Levi, as a boy, usually boys, girls sometimes talk a lot more and a lot sooner than boys. Well, Levi started talking like crazy, and he's just a big, big talker. He's very, very verbal. Hence the gospel presentations and all those stories, right? That's just part of how God wired him. Silas talked later and is talking later, talks less. He's smaller, and he's just a different kid. And so we don't have the exact same expectations of, oh no, he's supposed to be doing this because this blog I read said if they're not doing this by this age, then they're behind, and then we stress out and we call in the experts and, please, does my child have a learning disability? And, there are learning disabilities out there, but I think a lot of times people get way overstressed about pushing and following the schedule. Each child develops at their own pace, and boys are different than girls, and they have different gifts. And so we want to not be so heavy-handed with that. One of the things Barna found is, yes, we're challenging our kids, of course. We're not just like hippie parents, letting them be free as a bird and feel as they want to feel and do as they want to do. But we are making sure that we're not over intense. Like I've seen in some of my students, a lot of pressure. Certain cultures do this more than other cultures as well. So just check your own practices on that. The little ones should be educated in childlike simplicity. They should be trained to be content with the small, helpful duties and the pleasures and experiences natural to their years. Now, speaking of that, I absolutely have to bring in probably the single most important thing that my friend Joshua White has contributed in the Classroom of the Remnant. And in the Classroom of the Remnant, he shares the studies and the findings that are consistent with the spirit of prophecy about the importance of delaying formal education until age 8 or 10. And I talk about that in Undoctrinated. I talk about that a little bit in Schooled. My friend Joshua talks about that in the Classroom of the Remnant. And here I am, once again, just mentioning it in the Raising of the Remnant, because this is one of the most neglected principles, and it's hugely important. We have a situation today where they push full-time kindergarten, get the kids in school earlier, get them reading earlier, get them longer periods in desks at an earlier age. And I'm going, wait a minute, this development over the past 15 or 20 years, this is not in line with inspiration or research. For the spirit of prophecy tells us true education is not the forcing of instruction on an unready and unreceptive mind. We're developing our kids at a pace that is natural to them. And so if they are unready, the mental powers must be awakened, the interests aroused. But not just that. Mothers, let the little ones play in the open air. Let them listen to the songs of the birds and learn the love of God as expressed in His beautiful works. That's how little ones should live. Teach them the simple lessons from the book of nature and the things about them. And then this is the part that I wanted to get to. As their minds expand, lessons from books may be added and firmly fixed in the memory. So we just saw there's such a thing as an unready mind. And we just saw that there is a point where their minds expand and are ready for books. Now, when does a child's mind expand? When is it ready for books? At one point it's unready. At one point it's not expanded sufficiently. This is really where it comes in. I'll tell you something. Just like Jesus' mind, the powers of Jesus' mind and body developed gradually, there were the laws of childhood. The laws of childhood are in place. And our children develop according to those laws of childhood. Yes, with some variations, as I mentioned earlier. But what about some absolutes? Little children whose limbs and muscles are not strong and whose brains are undeveloped have been kept confined indoors to their injury. So again, there's a time where little children are to be outdoors and to not be kept confined long indoors. Their minds are unready. Their minds are not sufficiently developed according to the laws of childhood. We just read undeveloped. I said that already. So here's some actual firm fixed year statements. During the first 6 or 7 years of a child's life, special attention should be given to its physical training rather than the intellect. So for the first 6 or 7 years, rather than the intellect, schoolwork, reading, academic learning, at least the first 6 or 7 years, rather than the intellect, we're focusing on other things. Talking about delayed formal education right now. Let's look at some more quotes. Too much importance cannot be placed on the early training of children. The lessons that the child learns during the first 7 years of life have more to do with forming his character than all that it learns in future years. So there's a period of time, for 6 or 7 years at least, we're going to see some more numbers in a second, where they're developing physically and they're developing their characters rather than the intellect. Now it's going to get really serious. Parents should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. I paraphrase this all the time. There's the quote. The only schoolroom for children from 8 to 10 years of age should be in the open air amid the opening flowers and nature's beautiful scenery. Isn't that amazing? Now that's serious given what the latest research is. And I'm not going to try and reproduce and repeat it all because my friend Joshua White does such a good job at it, and he does a way better job than I can. But basically, let me just give you the skinny on it, okay? You got 2 hemispheres in your brain, right? Left hemisphere, right hemisphere. This is intellectual, linear, logical thinking, academic, book learning, mathematics, etc. All of this schoolwork type of stuff, left hemisphere. Right hemisphere, the artistic, the aesthetic, the spiritual. Now, this area of the brain develops in girls until 7 or 8, in boys until a year or 2 after that. After the right hemisphere is developed, the left starts. So what we just read in Spirit of Prophecy is validated by modern science. The spiritual is developing until 7 or 8 in girls, and a couple years later in boys. And after that, the intellectual, academic, linear, logical hemisphere of the brain develops. So what happens when we urge the intellectual during the period of time when this one is developing? If we're going, go to school at 5, learn to read at 6, make sure to have your academic lessons and your children in desks and, checking in with the county on that, and let's push earlier academics. You know what we're doing? We're doing this stuff when this area of the brain is developing, and so this spiritual development doesn't take place as it ought to, because you're rerouting over here when this is the area that needs the focus. Character development, as we just read, until these later ages. Isn't that powerful? And here we are going just following the world's model, and we just put our kids in school as early as the world does. When we have this counsel that says wait till 8 or 10, we should have trusted it. We didn't need the science. We should just trust the inspiration. Many children have been ruined. This really matters. Many children have been ruined for life by urging the intellectual and neglecting to strengthen the physical powers. And Barna actually found that successful parents are sensitive to their children's stress level and burnout factor. So this is related. Not so much intensity. I think I've hit that theme well enough. Let's go to another Barna research finding. College degrees, intellectual and economic advancement were considered secondary to character and service. So he's not, the successful parents who raised spiritually strong young adults, their focus was not primarily on the academic, on the intellectual, on the economic advancement and achievements of college degrees and all of that. These things aren't bad, of course. They're good and important. In Undoctrinated, I share a quote about how we must not let down the standard on the academics. And that is important. But you're actually going to have better academics starting later. Joshua gets into that, how later readers catch up and exceed their peers who started earlier. Amazing, amazing research. I love this one. The more quiet and simple the life of the child, the more free from artificial excitement and the more in harmony with nature, the more favorable it is to physical and mental vigor and to spiritual strength. To live in the country would be very beneficial to children. An active out-of-door life would develop health of both mind and body. They should have a garden to cultivate where they might find both amusement and useful employment. I should have more information on country living in this session. I just realized that right now because this is hugely important. In fact, I'm going to have a whole component of a series I'm working on right now called Second Beast Rising. That whole series is going to cover everything about the global crisis and final events and current events and what's going on in our world and relating that to Bible prophecy and the great controversy theme and religious liberty and all of these things coming together in like a massive series, okay? And one of the key elements of that is going to be the country living message and how important that is. I've read in Spirit of Prophecy that it is 10 times more difficult to raise children for the Lord in the city than in the country. And what a hugely important message. We've got the gardening, we've got agriculture that I talk about in Undoctrinated. So just a plug for Second Beast Rising. It's coming, or maybe when you're viewing this video, it's already out, and that's not through Belt of Truth Ministries. I'm doing 2 ministries simultaneously right now, Belt of Truth Ministries and 11thHourDispatch.com. So you can look into that to learn more about country living. I apologize that there's not more of that in the Raising the Remnant seminar. There really ought to be, because my family really felt convicted to move into the country, to live that way that the Lord has called us to live, which the patriarchs lived, and He has called His people to live through the millennia. And it's really going to be a major, major blessing to them. So here we go with a statement that some parents give much time and attention to amusing their children. But children should be trained to amuse themselves, to exercise their own ingenuity and skill. Thus they will be content with very simple pleasures. So here's some examples. I told you there's Levi with the chef's hat and baking some banana bread there on the tray, and Levi and Silas doing their construction, as Levi likes to call it there, with their trucks in the sand. And you know, when you live in the country, you don't need a sand box. You just got giant sand piles and all kinds of, nature has way more cool toys than indoors in the suburbs. So we just love living out in the country. And we didn't grow up in the country. We didn't naturally love it. It doesn't come naturally to us. Our bias and bent is toward the city. When we first moved out into the country, we were stressing over how often we might be able to get back into town. And now we don't hardly ever want to go to town because we love it out there. And it's just a blessing to be in the midst of nature. Now, there's a whole book, by the way, called Country Living. If you don't have that, you need to get that and read through that. Ellen G. White, Country Living. And you will not walk away from that book thinking there's any other place to raise children other than in the country. Let the mother find time to cultivate in herself and her children a love for the beautiful things of nature. We've had to do that. You have to cultivate a love for it. And next to the Bible, nature is to be our great lesson book. To the little child, not yet capable of learning from the printed page or of being introduced to the routine of the schoolroom, nature presents an unfailing source of instruction and delight. Silas especially, our 2-year-old, he absolutely loves getting outside. If we leave the door open, he will go out there on his own. He'll just be out there randomly running around the yard, chasing the kittens and so on. And the kids just could be outside literally all day. When we call him to come inside, it says, I don't want to go outside kind of thing. And really, this isn't that radical. This isn't abnormal. This is very human. This is very normal throughout human history. Concentrating in large crowded cities or the artificial, suburban life, this is not the way that human beings have lived for thousands of years. This is not how God designed us to live. God put Adam in a garden, right? That's his ideal. And in the last session, we're going to talk about the topic that parents all want to talk about. And I'm saving it for the last session on purpose. Because if we don't do all of this first, then when we talk about discipline, we're putting the cart before the horse. Have we met our children's emotional needs? Have we gotten them outside? Have we met their physical needs of plenty of water at regular times, eating their meals at regular times, quality nutrition, not giving them the junk and the meat and the sugars, getting them enough sleep? Have we met all of those needs? Have we done everything that we've heard in this session about connecting with them, being their companion, giving them sympathy and tenderness and all of these emotional needs, your time? If we do all of these things, we will find the need for session 4 will be decreased significantly. And that's all I'll say about that right now. I'll save the rest for session 4. Let's close in prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the blessing and joy of children. And I pray that you'd give us wisdom to make changes where we need to make changes, to prioritize and rebalance how it is that we do life with our kids and with our homes and with our work. Help us, Father, to hear your voice and to train our children to be the final message, to bear the final message of warning and hope to this dying world. Lord, I know that we need to be living in the country not just for the blessing of our children, but also for the difficult times that are coming upon us. And I pray that you'd inspire folks to read chapter 79 in child guidance about Sabbath keeping, and also read the Country Living book so that we can seek your will in regard to where we live and how we live with our children. In Jesus' name, amen.